Yeah, residential is more. It's basically where people are going to live. So that's your, if you come into Cyberpunk, you have your apartment. If you come into Star Citizen, you have your apartment. So that will be where people can have cribs, basically. So you'll be able to. This is a little bit longer term, but you'll be able to, if you have a large building, you'll be able to rent that building out. You'll be able to, like develop units inside of it, and then sell those units, and or rent those units out. And so
I
that's
yeah,
that's the first. Go ahead.
I think a big one with residential, which is we haven't said much about, is there's your living quarters displaying art and things like that. I think is super cool. The ability to host people and gatherings, and really inventory. I think inventory is a huge one of like you actually are going to need a place to store things, and the more space you have in your residential, you know, the more assets you'll be able to acquire and store things. So I think that's a really big one with residential, which we haven't said much about, but
Yeah, there are going to be mechanics like sleeping and getting, like food and things like that. So that's all. Um, that's not as far along as some of the other things, but the idea is that you'll have a bunch of different reasons. I think also, like, garages are going to be really big because, like, as part of storage, what Frank was saying is, and then having multiple locations. So when you boot in, the plan right now, and this could change, but the plan right now is when you boot in, you'll kind of boot into your space. So the map is so big, if you're at one side of the space, or one side of the island, or the other side of the island, or in the future the mainland, there will really be an advantage to being able to kind of like boot into a place where, maybe your friends are, or maybe it's an area you like to hang out, or maybe there's stuff going on there. So that's key.
So for residential, is it, and for avatars, will it be required that people have a home, a place to sleep? Is that a requirement?
It's not a requirement. There will be. We're figuring out exactly how it'll work if you basically don't have a. And there's different zones that we have kind of throughout the map, basically. But the benefit of having a crib is that you could then decide, okay, I want to boot in. I want to boot in here. I don't want to kind of go into this random place, travel, or whatever the case may be.
Cool. And then you're saying that residential may also be used for storage, like a warehouse or something like that. That's pretty cool.
More like your closet, and there'll be larger closets,
I see.
and then you'll have like probably parking, depending on the building. But the bigger buildings will be able to have deeper underground garages and underground parking. I mean, just like real life. So if you have a bigger apartment, in theory, you have more parking spaces, and you have under storage underneath as well. So yeah, there's a lot of utility in the residential, and having a residential plot. Like, I think people will want to eventually have like a few. They'll want to have a few different homes, basically, just because the map's so big.
so commercial, I think it's more just like establishments, for example. So retail shops. So once you actually say you're like a creator and you want to actually produce something, once we have the SDK and we have kind of the UGC tools, like we said, that come once you refine your resources and start producing things, the ability to produce assets. So you've maybe seen like the Air Wild store in some of the demos and all the shoes in there. So really being able to have retail spaces for cyberware, I think, is huge. You can think of car dealerships. We have, currently like a wheels dealership, moto shop, that's maybe been seen in some demos too. So those are kind of like some key core use cases that already exist based on assets we've launched. Another one is more kind of like restaurants, cafes. Feels like n3o might have a bagel shop. So that's kind of, I would say, like two of the core use cases. Is there any others that you want to mention, n3o?
Yeah, really just I think it'll surprise us, to be honest. I mean, camera shops are pretty cool idea that I'm excited about, because I think metaverse photography will be really, I mean, you can see some of the epic imagery that we're starting to produce. Why the imagery is getting more epic is because we literally just go in there and take pictures, and we're able to pop out these really cool images. So I think people being able to do that will be huge. um, yeah, I think there'll just be many clubs is another thing, like private clubs and things like that people can be members to. Obviously you have, you know, bars and nightclubs and things like that. um, but yeah, I think really anything. um, the way that we'll build it is there'll be different ways in which you can, there'll be different systems that we build out, and different industries will come online at different times. So it won't be just like, hey, you can go build a camera shop before the camera shop actually um, exists, before that functionality exists in the game. So there's a lot in terms of, different use cases will roll out, and then all of a sudden we'll have lots of camera shops, and we'll have lots of, could be a weapons shop, or could be, whatever. But it'll depend on that. One of the cool things about the supply chain is, um, you could vertically integrate. Like, you could do your own mining, and you could do your own refining, and you could manage all of that, and then you could produce, create your own factory, produce your own goods, and then sell it in your own store. But I think what's more likely to happen is people will specialize. People will be into opening retail shops, other people will be, in selling goods that get made, and building relationships with other community members who, are building different things, and saying, hey, well, sell those things. I'd love it if you sold some percentage of what you're making over there here. And I think these real relationships will form, in addition to kind of, I think that, well, that is kind of like the center of the economy, is relationships, is people working together. So I think that element is going to be pretty cool too.
The first question is around mixed use. So specifically of those units, is that something where you have to pick one and like you build around one type, or are those all going to have like multiple options where the first floor could be commercial and the rest be residential? How will that work?
It basically just means you're not limited by the zoning, so you can kind of think of it like a wild card.
Okay, so you pick one and then kind of build around that concept.
You can kind of build whatever. Yeah. So it just gives you, zoning will never be an issue. Basically, you can just kind of do anything.
Cool. Next question is around floors. So should we come to the understanding that like every floor you have in a unit is buildable? Like if you have 100 floors, you can customize every single floor to your liking?
Yeah, those systems aren't finished yet. But I mean, obviously the foundation of how we do it, and all the core systems are done. But basically, what you're getting is, so mainland is obviously getting no buildings at all. They have to build the buildings from scratch. Talking about some of those procedural systems that Frank was talking about, um, and that will be, later effectively. But for the mainland, you're getting a building which is like a shell, basically, and that shell will have floors, but it'll have floors and stairs and things like that, but it won't really have anything else. Like, um, you'll have to decide where the walls are, and things like that. Kind of like if you just, you know, bought a building in the real world. Like, they don't come with, it's like, it's a whole other process for building the interiors, obviously, than the exterior. So people will need to build the interiors effectively. And then there's like interior decoration, which is more like the final step. But yeah, so floors will be in, but everything else you'll have to basically build.
Awesome.
You just have like a huge penthouse, or you could chop them up and have lots of rooms and things like that.
Sweet. That's awesome. Love to hear that. You mentioned like load in. I'm curious when, is the function when you're in the world, like if I go into my residence, is it like in a traditional game where like I open the door and I load in and then like I kind of go through a like possible like load screen and then I'm in my unit and I have all those levels loaded. If people come visit, kind of the same thing, like in, like in a game where like you open a door and sort of just like you kind of poof are now in that building, but you're not really quite in the bigger world anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is you'll still be in the like a single world with this. Like it won't be like you're in a like you go into loading screen and you're kind of in a different place. You'll be in where you are, basically.
Cool. And then my last question you kind of brought up around like, and it was more around the commercial piece. So like you mentioned opening a gun shop or a camera shop. Should we come to understand like if I open a camera shop, like how do I acquire cameras? Is that the like through resourcing? I mine resources and then I have to build a camera with said resources, and then I can sell that so someone doesn't have to build their own camera. They can come to me because I've curated the cameras. Like how do you envision that type of commerce working and like the
Yeah,
sourcing of
I
items?
yeah, you'll be able to customize certain things, and you know how games have crafting, and you can kind of like craft something from scratch.
Yep.
This will be more you need to buy it, or you'll need to earn it, and then that gives you the base asset, and then then you can maybe customize it. Like you could get a gun and you could customize the attachments on it, or a sword and you could attach the you could customize the attachments on it, if that makes sense. So you can't just craft something, you can't just build something out of nowhere as a player. You have to that object has to have gone through like an industrial kind of manufacturing process. So what we'll do as the studio is we'll create a procedural system for cameras, and we'll create all these different cameras, and someone will lead that industry internally, and then there'll be a process for producing those in the world, and possibly then a SDK where other people could come up with their own ideas on cameras and things like that, and that kind of defines all the constraints for the game. And then to produce that camera, it'll need to go through a series of steps, and then the factory that produces those cameras will want to sell them, because they're just like a factory out on the mainland, basically. And then so the shops will be places where you then build a relationship with someone who's manufacturing cameras. That's like a specific type of blueprint, or weapons or whatever, and then you have a deal with them where you buy the inventory and then you mark it up and you sell it in the store, basically.
Got it. So commercial owners will have like an extra ability to kind of curate those items to sell, or even add like custom elements to them to sell to the greater community.
Yeah, in higher traffic areas. So if there's people that just come
But
in,
there won't. But I couldn't buy a camera through like the Wilder item store. I have to buy it from a camera store.
I mean, initially we're going to be building a bunch of stores to kind of get the thing bootstrapped and get the thing going. But our hope and wish is that it would be the community that is managing most of the commerce.
Awesome.
So
Cool.
it's like
That was my
Apple,
questions.
think of them like apps. Like Apple builds apps, obviously, and Apple has apps on the App Store, but Apple's in the App Store business. They're not in the creating apps business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it starts with mining. We do have an image in one of the previous devlogs, I think devlog 11, it kind of just shows the overview of the virtual supply chain. So mine, refine, produce, and sell. So those would kind of be the key moments. So starting with mining, then refining the resources in like an industrial facility, and then being able to actually turn those resources into goods, and then pushing those resources kind of all the way to the retail space where they can be bought and sold, and so on and so forth.
So the refinement happens on the kind of an industrial plot. Is that the understanding then, or is it done kind of in the background somehow?
Yeah, it's on an industrial.
Okay. So if I own an industrial plot, then I could also buy just raw resources, not necessarily mining them myself, and then refine those into specific goods to then sell to those that have a commercial storefront.
Yeah, there's two processes. Like there's two different types of main industrial processes. One is converting raw materials into like root objects, like fundamental objects, basically. So like you'd convert iron and copper and something else into like a plate, and then that plate would be used in. Then there's an assembly process, right? So creating the plates and the fundamental objects is different than creating the building, like creating the finished product. So you'd have so there's different types of factories, and then there's different types of refineries. So a refinery converts raw materials into objects. A factory converts objects into products, basically.
And both would be housed on a industrial plot?
Yeah, they're housed on industrial plots, and that's in the city though, which is more limited. So the mainland, exactly how that's working on the mainland is still not completely finalized. It's close, but there's less industrial capacity in the city, and so one of the advantages of that is like it's closer, so there's less cost, like that. So, but yes, that's effectively what it is.
So theoretically, if I have an industrial plot and I have, I don't know, 18 floors, I could have a refinery at the lower part and then factory on the upper part, and basically complete the supply chain from raw to final object.
Yeah, there will be limits in terms of like, I don't want to get into like, hey, on the bottom you can do this, or on top you can do this, because the industrial buildings are going to be quite a bit different than than just the regular buildings. But in essence, yes, there'll be different types of industrial kind of configurations you can choose, and then there's something called blueprints, and those blueprints are basically what that factory can produce, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
And yeah, that's basically how it works.
Okay. No, that's great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, there'll be more details as it rolls out. Obviously, this is extremely complex and it's never been done before, so it's really important that it rolls out in stages, basically, and then we test and and see. Like balancing the economy is probably going to be one of the trickiest things at this stage, and it will require a lot of iteration. But that's basically the sort of high level of how it'll work.